the way the amalgamation of metropolitan Toronto into the city of Toronto was badly done. I mean, it was forced by the Mike Harris government, ostensibly to make it much more economical to govern, lower common denominator. What happened was that all of the departments that were amalgamated went to the highest common denominator. So it was more expensive rather than less expensive. That's just one aspect. But the trouble is they couldn't amalgamate the attitudes, and the attitudes are different in Scarborough and Etobicoke and outer North York than they are in the inner city. And it's going to take 100 years to settle down. There are people in New York City, which was amalgamated 100 years before we were, that still think of Brooklyn as an independent city as it was then, and are as mad as hell that it's now part of New York, and they still think of Brooklyn as their city. It just takes forever to change people's attitudes. Where people live is a sort of a much deeper passion than officials are willing to admit. So, and the way it was done here was even worse. So, Montreal was clever enough to, everybody thinks of Montreal as kind of politically chaotic with the corruption and all the rest of it. But they dissolved their similar amalgamation and went back to not quite what it was, but more like what it was. There are several separate cities, and they seem to get along better that way. I'm not saying that we should de-amalgamate, but the first act that happened when that amalgamation happened was that the local community councils were formed with virtually the same boundaries as the old so-called cities of Scarborough and North York. So what did we accomplish? You just built higher and thicker walls between us. My community council wants this, and the hell with yours. And that's the general attitude.
So I guess changing the attitudes is actually
That's the main thing to do. That is the main thing you have to do. And of course, they just forced it. I've got a file about a foot thick of what happened. I call it the amalgamation two-step, the records of all of the meetings and all that was said, and the Golden Commission and this commission and that commission. Nobody listened to anybody. Mike Harris said this is going to happen on whatever date it was. That was it. And it was rammed down everybody's throat. And it was done in a very, very sort of not violent, but there was no brooking of any compromise in any way, and now we're suffering for it.